or good evening, depending upon where you are in the world. This is Patrick Milliken from the Poison Pen Bookstore in Scottsdale, Arizona. And we're delighted to have our friend Fiona Davis with us this evening, talking about her brand new book, The Stolen Queen. And as always, Fiona has been kind enough to sign a bunch of books for us. So I'll put a link in the comments field if you'd like to go ahead and order one of those. And if you have questions for Fiona, go ahead and type them in, and Barbara will bring me on screen towards the end of the hour, and I'd be happy to ask any of those questions. So Barbara, over to you.
Thank you very much, Patrick. Hi, Fiona. It's lovely to see you again.
Lovely to see you. Thank you so much for this.
Well, it's a pleasure. I was just saying, I believe that Fiona and she has signed books, and we have had a event, I think all of them Zoom events for every one of her books, so we haven't broken our record. So how many books is this now? Is it 8?
This is 8, lucky number 8. Yeah.
Good for you. And I really, years ago, before various things happened, my friend Linda Fairstein wrote a series in which part of it was to explore all kinds of special landmarks and cultures and so forth of New York City. And Fiona is, in a very different way, doing the same thing. So we've been in the New York Public Library, we've been various places. And in this book, we are at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, one of my personal favorite places. So Fiona, I guess the question would be, do you pick an institution and then work on a story, or do you work on a story and pick the institution?
Yeah, that's a great question. And first of all, I have to say, I read Ms. Fairstein's books before I start writing, because I know she's been there first and done a lot of research. So I love reading those books and getting in the institution in a book before I get into the institution. But I do pick the building first.
Okay.
And yeah, and so far every building I've picked, I've kind of stayed with, because I think there's so many generations of secrets and stories in some of these old buildings in New York, including the Met. But the way I got into this book was a little interesting, and not what you'd expect, because I thought about the Met and I thought, oh, I'm totally intimidated. It's too huge. How do I choose how to get in? And then I read in the New York Times this article about the 2018 Met Gala, and it mentioned that Kim Kardashian had come, and she wore this gold glittery, very tight dress. And during the event, she stood next to this gold sarcophagus that the Met had acquired the year before for $4 million. And the photo went viral because it's a very cool photo. And to the point that the Jordanian smuggler who'd originally stolen the sarcophagus complained to an undercover informant that he'd never gotten paid, which then got back to the Manhattan DA's office, where they have a whole unit on stolen art. And they did some digging and found that the export papers had been falsified. And so the Met was forced to give it back in the end. And I just thought, what a weird mix of pop culture with the Met Gala and then ancient art with the Egyptian wing. And that's where I thought, okay, let's take those two and put them together.
I love that. I mean, I'm so old that I remember when the Temple of Gender made its way to the Met, and they built the, special pavilion for it on the north side with glass. In fact, I remember nagging HarperCollins that they ought to have a book launch party for the Amelia Peabody series for Elizabeth Peters at the Temple of Gender, and eventually they did. So, the Met's collection of Egyptology is extremely good. The temple is a remarkable story. And I can see why that would engender some ideas on your half. The other thing I really love is that I'm very fond of Hatshepsut, the pharaoh, that you've given another name in this book. Why did you do that? Why didn't you call her Hatshepsut?
Yeah, well, Hatshepsut, I love that name. It sounds like a sneeze. And I wanted to put that joke in the book, and I couldn't because I had to change the name. But here's the thing. Hatshepsut was fascinating, and I'll do a quick review for anyone who doesn't know her, where she was a rare female pharaoh. She married her half-brother at 12. He died 7 years later. She took over as regent while she didn't have any male heirs. So the only heir was the infant son of a concubine. And so she became regent until the child was old enough, but she ruled for 20 years really successfully, did a brilliant job. And then after she died, the stepson had many of her images hacked off of the reliefs and many of her statues destroyed. And so everyone assumed it was because he was mad that she ruled for so long. And then the Met did an archaeological dig in the 1920s, and they found this quarry filled with broken statues. And no one really knew who Hatshepsut was because she didn't seem important. There wasn't much about her. And they put together these statues and realized, oh no, she was really important. You know, we missed this. And they said, you know, it must have been because she was this detested stepmother and a vain, ambitious, unscrupulous woman, which is how they describe her in the Met catalog in the 50s.
Hit that.
Yeah, yep. And then in the 60s, another scholar does some work and realizes that, oh no, all that destruction happened much like 24 years after her death, which is a really long time to hold a grudge. And so it didn't make sense anymore. And they thought, well, maybe it was because the stepson wanted his son to be the next pharaoh. And there may have been females in other clans who threatened the throne. And so we wanted to get the idea of a female pharaoh out of the public eye. And it makes sense because that destruction stopped right around when his son was determined to be successor. So you have all that great history. And I talk about, you know, it's a woman she was revered and then erased and then reviled and then restored. And recently they found her mummy, which is a whole other story in itself, which I included in the book. But here's the thing, many other scholars and educators and Egyptologists did all that work to learn about Hatshepsut. And in my book, I wanted my character to do all that work and to have all these discoveries. And so Charlotte in the book is a curator at the Egyptian wing. She's 60 years old. She's been there a long time. She does all the work, gets none of the glory. And she's found out this really fascinating fact about Hatshepsut that might make her career. And I wrote it with Hatshepsut at first. And then I just realized I had to change too many things in terms of timelines and who did what to make it work with the plot. And I thought, you know, it'd be just easier to make up a new one so people don't get confused. And so I don't get letters of people saying, well, no, that's not, you know, the year that the mummy was found. You know, this way I could make it my own. She's called Hathorkare in the book. And then in the author's note, of course, I explain very clearly what is inspired, what really happened, so anyone else can go down that rabbit hole.
Got
That's
it.
a long explanation.
No. I think it's a really important one. And the thing is that, and I don't know, and maybe you can remind me, is the temple actually Hatshepsut or is it something else? Because if she was so reviled, why is it that the temple is still standing? Did they just appropriate it for somebody else?
No, her mortuary temple still stands.
Yeah.
It's next to the, yeah. Oh yeah, that's her temple. And there's places there that you can see her figure's been hacked away. Her face, her cartouche has been completely hacked. And so, yeah, so they knew she, you know, had to have done something, but there were all these rumors that she slept with her architect. Like it was just, you know, the typical way you treat a successful woman often, you know, where she just gets kind of maligned. And yeah, and so that temple is there. And the Temple of Dendor, though, the one in the Met, which you mentioned, that wasn't done until 15 BC. So that's pretty recent.
It is pretty recent. It's only there because of the Aswan Dam and an attempt to save it. And somebody wrote, I think it's about a French archaeologist who had a lot to do with saving the Temple of Dendor.
Yes, Christiane Desroches. Yeah. She was fascinating. In fact, she is the inspiration for Charlotte in the 1930s part of the book. Christiane Desroches was this incredible French resistance fighter in World War II. She saved all this art from the Louvre, from getting it into German hands. And then she became an archaeologist and had these incredible finds. And anyone who's interested should check out the book by Lynn Olson called Empress of the Nile. A great read.
It is a great read. I've been showing it. So Patrick, can you show us a picture or two of temples just to kind of, not temples, but pyramids and stuff, just to kind of get the idea across? The thing that's so interesting is that, you know, they are still today like they were way back. So this is me on the right or left, whichever way you're looking. And Dana Stabinet, she was on a research trip and we went together. And this is in Saqqara. It's not, you know, in Giza. But you can see that we could really have been there, I don't know, 1,500 years ago, and it wouldn't have looked any different.
Yeah, what blew me away is that the pyramids were ancient for the ancient Egyptians.
Yeah.
You know, they've been around for thousands of years. It's just hard to imagine.
Yep, that's the step pyramid, which is, they didn't all have the same design. We all think that they all look like the, you know, the great pyramids at Giza, but they didn't. And this is a different architectural design.
Yeah. It's great. You were there a couple times, right?
3.
3. Wow.
Now, I think that's Hatshepsut's actual mortuary temple, isn't it? Or is it at
That
Philae?
looks like Karnak. That looks like the Temple of Karnak.
Yeah, I think, yeah, it probably is. And when I was looking at my phone with my bad eye today, I couldn't really distinguish which way, which was what. I thought I had one of the mortuary temple. Anyway, that is yet a different room. And of course,
And the Temple of Karnak has an obelisk that she designed and
right.
had built, one of the tallest in the world. Yeah, it's amazing.
So in order to go inside a pyramid, you didn't enter them at ground level. So this is a smaller pyramid, once again in Saqqara. And in order, you can see the entrance up where there's kind of a horizontal structure. To get there, you have to climb up that incredibly rickety staircase that kind of zigs and zags. When you get in it, there's a small space, and to descend into the pyramid itself and get back closer to ground floor, you have to go head first down this kind of chute that has a few wooden bars there. It's easy to climb out of. It's horrible to go down in. Thank God, because honestly, if I thought it was going to be that hard to climb back out again, I probably would still be there.
Yeah, I mean, even in the Valley of the Kings, where King Tut was found, we were able to go into some of the tombs there. And some of them, it's really steep and kind of slippery, and you really have to hang onto the rail. They did not make it easy. And partly because they didn't want tomb robbers to come and rob things.
I know. And sadly, this particular temple was completely hollow inside. All the tomb robbers had been there. But what was interesting is that the vault inside the temple echoed the shape of the temple itself. So it was that kind of a shape inside. I wasn't sure that would be the case. I thought it might be there. You can see
Yeah.
it's called the Red Pyramid, and this is either Dana or me going head first down inside. And I mean, you think about what people went. I mean, imagine cutting that stone and working in those little tiny enclosed spaces.
And often they decorated them too. So they would paint, they, would spend hours in their painting.
Yeah, I mean, it's just incredible. And of course, around the pyramids, there are whole villages, which come into play in your book, where they have now done a lot of work, unearthing what it was like for all the people that lived and worked there.
Yeah.
So, is there another one, Pam? I don't think I sent you very many photos. Oh, that's Dana and me congratulating ourselves, having triumphantly emerged from climbing down the temple.
Oh, wow.
And that is Howard Carter and Laura Carnarvon. Howard Carter with his hands up, and Laura Carnarvon when they had bashed through and the entrance to King Tut. That is a photograph that you can find, I think, at the entrance to King Tut's tomb. And Laura Carnarvon gave sort of credence to the curse. He was bitten by a mosquito, and his mosquito bite got infected and he died. And lots of people thought that there was an actual curse, from opening up the tomb.
Right. And that happened 6 weeks after I think they opened it. So yeah, it was considered the curse, but it was just a mosquito bite.
Yeah, but I mean, there was,
Yeah.
there was a lot of bad air and germs and stuff inside tombs. I suspect quite a few people. And it wouldn't be that different, for example, if you'd been a first responder at 9/11 and, all that stuff was in the air and damaged your lungs. So it's amazing the tomb robbers didn't kill. That is a wall inside King Tut's tomb. I think that's the lid of the sarcophagus. It's not in very good shape. And I chose that just to show you that it's a very overrated tomb. It really is. It's not nearly as gorgeous as most of the tombs and is very small.
And he was such an underrated king too. He didn't do all that much. He died young.
Well, there's a theory that the reason it's so small is it's the antechamber to something larger. But when he died so unexpectedly, they had to, shove him somewhere. And they're using LiDAR to try to penetrate the walls of the tomb, as I understand it, to see if, in fact, there is a bigger tomb inside,
Yeah.
which would be a great discovery, should it happen to be. And that's one of the villages towards the valley, the Valley of the King a pathway, but there were people who lived all around it. And this is where Charlotte, would like to have spent her time, right?
Yes. Oh yeah, yeah. Yeah. I mean, it was they loved the towns that were around the pyramids, a lot of the archaeologists, because they left behind so many little notes called ostraka, which were on limestone, and that was like their notebook. And so they would find prescriptions and bills and legal documents and all these pieces of daily life of the ancient Egyptian, which has really helped them figure out what was going on when and who did what.
Absolutely. And more recently, they've opened up some tombs in the Valley of the Queens, which we were able to see in 2019. This is hieroglyphs that are I love the way that they raise them. It's if you know anything about the history of printing, sometimes things are gouged in and sometimes things are raised and the background is gouged away. This one I think is lovely. And the colors, it's incredible that the colors have existed and I shouldn't say existed, have lasted as brilliantly as they have for so long.
And when you see the Temple of Dender and the Met, it's all just kind of sandstone, but it was very brilliantly colored when it
Yeah.
was done. And I love that there's graffiti on it from the 1800s.
Yeah, they were so well. The Sphinx, has graffiti, and this is the god Anubis up at the top, the jackal god, and he's kind of the god of death. And so I particularly liked him because, in fact, it's called Anubis dancing, but he's most people know only 2 or 3 Egyptian gods. I'm very fond of Anubis.
Is this where Steve Martin got his moves?
Maybe hard to say. There was years and years ago a woman named, I can't remember her name now too well, Linda, I think. Anyway, she wrote a series of murder mysteries set in ancient Egypt. And the first one was called something about death or murder at the temple
Place of Anubis.
Place of Anubis, right?
Linda Robinson.
That was it. God,
Oh,
Patrick, you're so much better at this than I am. It was a great series, and she went to a lot of trouble to learn the mummification process. So you could learn a lot by reading those. There was a big vogue for historical mystery in the 1990s. Lots of people, and there were 3 or 4 ancient Egyptian series. But I really liked Linda's. I thought they were great. Anyway, I think
Was the shaved head a thing? These guys down here with these figures on the bottom.
I know they wore wigs, especially the royalty would wear wigs.
Right.
The ones on the left would be wigs, but I don't know. It seems like it.
they had very elaborate wigs. You can see with the guy, the one over there on the left, or I can't tell which way we're looking at, maybe the right, but with the long black. And they had a very heavy crown that had a uraeus, a serpent. So they had the red land and the black land, both of those colors in this kind of bottle-like crown. And then they had a uraeus that, and it must have weighed a ton. It must have been so hard to wear. And, the lifespan of people was fairly short. 20 years that you mentioned about Hatshepsut ruling, that was a whole lifetime for some people.
Oh, that's
yeah. That is, I think, Queen Nefertari being led away or led towards whatever. I don't read hieroglyphs. Anyway, that's probably enough, Patrick, but thank you very much for showing those.
That actually was the last one.
Oh,
So
good. Okay.
yeah.
as part of my research, I went to the Egyptian art collection with an Egyptologist, and it was amazing to walk up to a tomb and have her read the hieroglyphs right off the tomb, because she's, is fluent. It's pretty incredible.
When
So
they unlocked the Mayan code too, that was a real break. I said when they kind of unlocked the Mayan code and they were able to read all the writing on the Mayan temples too. Really interesting.
Yeah,
Anyway, back into darkness I go.
Okay. Anyway, Charlotte is in Egypt in 1936. The war is coming in North Africa. Egypt is going to be a part of it, but it's not there yet. What happens to her? Because we start at the Met in 1978, but then we drop back to 1936. Where is she in Egypt exactly?
Yeah, she moves around a little bit, but near the Valley of the Kings and in Luxor mostly. But yeah, so she, I knew I wanted a character that was 60 years old. I'm 58, and I just thought there's not enough women in their 60s. You know, the heroines all tend to be 20s and 30s. I thought that might be interesting. And so I knew I wanted her to be 60. And I wanted to flash back to the 1930s because that was the time that I had studied in terms of Egyptology and what was going on then. So I was, you know, I had things I could pull from and sources for that. And so if she was around 19, then she'd be 60 in 1978, which is when the Temple of Dender was finally assembled and opened, when the King Tut exhibit came to town. And so, yeah, in the 1930s, she's this bright-eyed, you know, excited young girl who was very inspired by the discovery of King Tut and decides she wants to do this. And her parents allow her to take a year and go off, or a semester, and go to Egypt to do a dig sponsored by the Met. And, you know, she has a wonderful time and makes some incredible finds and makes some serious enemies. And that all comes around to make her life difficult. And so when you see her in the 60s, she's kind of cut off from people. She's been burned, she's had tragedies, and she's kind of very insular in not outward facing. And so in order to get my character kind of out of her slump, what I did is I paired her with a 19-year-old overeager assistant to the Met Gala. Because again, those are two very different departments. And Charlotte is serious, a scholar. And then this 19-year-old doesn't know what she's doing. She's completely unqualified, and she's determined to do a good job. And so the two of them butt heads as they're both trying to find something out about a stolen antiquity. And I just like that idea of these opposites attracting.
Well, and I also think, you know, Charlotte, I mean, the young woman is really on a path to nowhere. And Charlotte arranges for her, I think it's Charlotte, arranges for her to meet Diana Vreeland and become, you know, get hired for some kind of position. Diana Vreeland, for those of you who don't know her, she was the editor of Vogue and a real thing. She was a real powerhouse. The thing I've always loved about Diana Vreeland that I read somewhere, she always wore flesh-colored shoes and flesh-colored stockings because she thought then, you know, there was a better line from under her clothes because, you know, didn't wear lots of pants then, mostly dresses and so forth. And she had a personal maid, and every night the job for the maid was to polish the soles of Diana Vreeland's shoes so they would be immaculate the next day. And I thought, wow, there's really attention to detail.
Yeah, and she was one of those people. She was a tornado of a woman, and she was known for her sayings. And so one of them is "Unshined shoes are the end of civilization." You know,
Right.
she'd these edicts that she'd say, and that are hilarious and wonderful. And I really came to adore her as I wrote the book, I have to say.
Well, and so she developed, if not entirely responsible for it. Sorry, I thought that I had put that off. Go away. The Costume Institute at the Met, which has grown into a real powerhouse. And in fact, I would like, because today is the start of the Chinese Lunar New Year. It's the year of the wood snake, which I love. But anyway, there's a wonderful documentary called, what is it, The First Monday in May. And when it was made, which probably was, somewhere around, had to have been before COVID.
Yeah,
So,
like 2017 or 18, maybe
something
soon.
like that, right? Yeah, because I saw it on, believe it or not, they showed it on a cruise ship in 2019. We were on a cruise, and I was so amazed by this movie. And my husband's a museum junkie like me. I made him come and watch it with me all over again. But anyway, but now it's Anna Wintour, who is another powerhouse, and she and I'm trying to remember the name of the guy. Anyway, he's the head of the Costume Institute, and the whole thing revolves around China. And it's just amazing. It shows them going to China to do some negotiating so the Chinese wouldn't think they'd lost face about. And they were able to take the clothing and all, and they were able to put it into the Chinese department at the Met, which of course made the Chinese curators and all extremely nervous. So there was a lot of museum tension and all, but it's a fabulous movie. I can't recommend it enough, but it's particularly apt right now, since this is in fact the day that the Chinese New Year starts. You can rent it. I think it is called the first Monday in May, isn't it?
Because that's the day that the Met's held. In 1978, which is when the book is, it was held in November, so I stayed true to that. But I wanted, as part of the book, I wanted to take readers behind the scenes of what it's like for the preparations.
Yeah.
for the gala. And so that movie, of course, that documentary was so helpful because it's crazy, it's frantic. They're putting on this exhibit with these old clothes that are, you know, you have to be so careful with some of them, depending on what the exhibit, what the focus is, and it changes every year.
Mhm.
And I learned that the Met Gala started in 1949 as this kind of dowdy fundraiser in a hotel lunchroom type thing. And then Diana Vreeland was the one who came in the 70s, turned it around, made it this nighttime, you know, disco at the Temple of Dender with Mick Jagger and you know, Diana Ross and Jackie O. And it became the party of the year under her watch. And just to show how it's changed over time is in 1949, a ticket to the Met Gala cost $50. Today, it costs $75,000. Just one ticket.
And Anna Wintour is pretty ruthless about who gets to come and who sits at what table and so forth. Thank you for reminding me. It is Deanna. I called her Diana, but it's actually Deanna. And they're an interesting contrast because Deanna was really what the French would call belle-led. She was a very homely, dark, small woman. Anna Wintour, is just like super glamorous. So I think they're the only two, aren't they? I mean, since Vreeland, was there anybody between her and Anna Wintour?
Good question. I do not know the answer to that. I'm going to look that up though, because I'd be curious.
I kind of think that Anna Wintour has been there a really long time. So it's possible that, it went from one to the other. There might have been somebody that was a little bit of a bridge in there. But anyway, to combine the Met Gala and Egyptology was just the work of genius. I can't tell you how much I enjoyed that. And there is a crime in the book. So let's go back. We've talked about Charlotte. She's in Egypt. She's young. She wants to be an archaeologist. And there's a terrible disaster. And it's such a disaster that she goes home and is really broken, never quite fully recovers from it, as we're reading through the book. So
yeah.
it happens in 1978 that, is going to jog her out of this many years of kind of just, getting along.
Yeah, well, there's something about her past, a clue comes back that really shocks her because this clue should not be around. And so that eventually leads to the Met Gala, which happens about halfway through the book. And at the Met Gala, the worst thing that could possibly go wrong at a Met Gala goes wrong. And something is stolen eventually. And so she and Annie have to
Right.
go back to Egypt to figure out where this artifact is gone, who took it. And they both have very personal interests in it. And I like to say it's a cross between Thelma and Louise meets Indiana Jones meets The Devil Wears Prada. It's a complicated book, but I think it flows. I wanted to make it flow and make it a page turner and have twists that shock the reader and have an ending that really, brings you to tears if I can.
Well, I definitely think that it did. And I brought that up because I wanted to say that I like the fact that not every mystery, pardon me while I changed my screen here slightly, not every mystery has to have a murder in it. I mean, there are all kinds of wonderful mysteries that are about like, stolen necklaces or fraud or blackmail, or Dorothy Sayers wrote a number of short stories in which she never killed anybody. She always had some other crime going on. And I think there's a tendency to think when you hear the word mystery that it's going to be a murder mystery, but it doesn't have to be. So I really like the way this book is a mystery. I won't say whether anybody dies or not. Well, clearly the woman pharaoh has died centuries before, she's dead.
Although her curse lives on, so.
Yeah, she is. And anyway, I think it's brilliant. And you've had some interesting crimes. The one in the New York Public Library, I especially liked. Who knew that there was a secret room or sort of a I don't know if it's true anymore. Is it that there are living quarters within the New York Public Library for somebody who's on the staff?
They gave me a tour of the old apartment and it's still there, but it's offices and storage, but you can see what all the bedrooms were, where the kitchen was, the little stairway that goes to it. And I always tell them that they should Airbnb it because they'd make so much money. But right now it's just offices.
Oh, I'm sad to hear that because I think, I just love the idea that there was, there's a whole thing about, renting if you had that kind of a bookstore structure where you had a second floor, where in fact there are a couple of bookstores that have established Airbnbs above the bookstore.
Oh, which is wonderful. Page and Palette in Fairhope, Alabama. I was just there and they have one.
Uh-huh. There you are. So I love that idea, for NYPL. But
And
anyway, so Fiona, do you craft a crime that, because you need something propelling the plot? Do you have to craft a crime that kind of fits all the other things you're doing? Do you think of the crime first or last?
that's a good question. I think with this one, because of that New York Times article, I already had the idea of a stolen artifact in my head as I started doing research. So I think that came pretty early on, just from that initial story. But then what I did is I did a ton of research and I interviewed docents and security guards and curators, everybody at the Met that I could get my hands on. And it really is like a small city with everybody with their specific job that they do that make it all work together. And so that was fascinating. And I went to Egypt, which was a research trip as well. And then over that time, the characters start coming to me, and then the ideas of who they are and what might have happened, and what do they want? What can I put in their way? Because I always say that, you don't want to read about a happy family that gets happier. Like, that's not a book. You need something to happen. And so coming up with the obstacles and then figuring out how these characters will grow through the course of the book in a way that engages the reader and in a way that's not overpowering with all the historical stuff. I don't want it to be an educational volume, that you'd read at university. I want it to be a fun read that, you're just along for the ride and you learn a ton of stuff.
Well, you do learn a ton of stuff. So in, your basic structure, it almost has to be a two-part, right? You almost have to have something in the past and then somebody in the present who, I mean, it's not that different than a police department working a cold case in point of fact.
Good point. Oh, I hadn't thought of that. Yeah. In fact, so many murder mysteries are two different timelines in a sense. Yeah.
Well, and I'll tell you why. That's partly because the private eye is kind of a thing of the past, Spencer the gumshoe pounding the streets and all. And one of the most popular sleuths at the moment in crime fiction is the podcaster. And if it's going to be a podcaster, almost always has to be a cold case, because they're doing true crime essentially. And
Oh, right. That is such a trend. Yeah.
it really is, yeah, but it's reflecting reality because if the average private eye today is spending his time on computers, he's not out, in the mean streets of Los Angeles or Boston with his gun. And so since that's so boring, you wind up and now crowdsourcing has become kind of a thing for crime solving too. Now that so many people, I mean, it can be phones, it can be all kinds of things. So the nature of storytelling, if you are working in the private sector, has to change. Police procedural probably hasn't made such radical change, but the private eye novel definitely.
Yeah. And, that's one of the reasons I think I set many of my books before the computer age, before the internet, because it makes it harder for the clue for things to get solved, without a phone call, or you can have a missed connection because people don't have cell phones to say, hey, I'm running late. And that adds to the tension in the book, I find. I love writing, 1990s and earlier because it makes my job a little easier. And, that's also when I've been growing up. So 1978, 80s, 90s, it's kind of fun.
Well, it is. It's interesting. I realized, was it last year or the year before? I was looking for an historical mystery, and Laurie King had written this wonderful book called Back to the Garden, which is set in like 1973. And so I wasn't even thinking of it, And then I thought to myself, okay, when I opened the store in 1989, historical mystery, the line was like the 1920s. So, that was considered historical crime, but then you marched along and the rest of it was more or less contemporary. And I realized to my shock that 1970 was now 50 years, the needle had moved, and therefore I could actually call Back to the Garden and historical mystery. Oh, but I mean,
Yeah, I know.
well, you're coming to 60 and I'm 84 and you have a way to go, but to watch your life, to realize that your life is becoming history. And the things that you remember are, for most people, not only history, but unfamiliar at this point because it is so distant. So I think, your idea of keeping it not only to avoid technology, but keeping your forward case is still really history.
Yeah. Yeah. If I can, I really prefer that. Yeah. And this one was fun because the 70s were a great time in fashion.
Yeah.
It was, I found a 1978 travel guide to Egypt that I used as research because I could see, okay, what hotel would they stay in? What would they eat? How much would things cost? What was the Cairo museum like?
Terrible.
And yeah, terrible. And even the guidebook said that. I have it over here somewhere. It was
Oh,
like, if you
terrible.
go to the Cairo Museum, there will be no lights because there's no electricity. There will be, it,
Everything's dusty and dirty, and there's no security. And it's one of those great arguments for not repatriating things because it would be disastrous. And that's such a thorny subject today. Um,
and today, though, I have to say they have a brand new museum that's beautiful. And in fact, Hatshepsut's mummy lies in state there. And that's the older one actually where she lies. But there's a new one that was built right by the pyramids that's
right.
stunning. So things have changed.
They have changed, absolutely. I mean, there's a whole museum now at the Parthenon that, didn't exist. So with any luck, some countries where there's a serious amount of artifacts taken out of the country can take care of them if they go back.
And
So,
that's what I wanted to raise in the book because it really is a question that so many museums, not only the Met, are struggling with of what do they do with these items that were looted and stolen, sometimes very violently from, another country. And your question is right. Like, what if the country doesn't have the place to keep it safe or keep it free from humidity? Or what if, an oligarch wants to buy it and the government needs the money? So they sell it and then it gets put in his private villa and no one can access it, not researchers, not scholars, not students. Do they belong to humanity? Do they belong to the country of origin? And it's just a question that they're really struggling with. It's not an easy one. And I can't answer it in the book, but I did want to bring it up.
yeah, no, I think it is a very difficult question. Some years ago, it might have been 2016 or something, my husband and I spent a week at the Hermitage as guests of the Hermitage. We had been to St. Petersburg in the summer when the tourist traffic is so heavy that you can barely they give you like an hour to go through the museum. So when we had a chance to go for a week, and we had a choice between October and December. And Rob, I think, was about to, go, okay, let's go in October. And I said to him, no, no, no. I said, if we're going back to Russia, if we're going to go to St. Petersburg, we're going in December, which we did, which was great because there was nobody there. And it gave us a chance to range through the entire Hermitage and the Catherine Palace, the whole bit. But the thing is, it was just horrifying the way the galleries they had a Da Vinci in front of an open window looking out, on the river. And it really, is terrible. But then you think about the Mona Lisa under somebody's bed for 2 or 3 years, when it was stolen. Art has a way to kind of survive. Have you read any of Daniel Silva's books? The last one or two back, I can't remember which, about the Freeport in Switzerland?
No, no.
You might want to look at that because there is an unbelievable amount of art and other stuff that people stash in what's this Freeport. So it's a tax haven, and it isn't money. It's actual Gabriel, Alon is now back into art and he's tracking a painting and it's hidden away, in the Freeport. So the same thing you mentioned, if an oligarch wants it and then buys the maybe Da Vinci and puts it up in his yacht where nobody but him can see it. That's a really tough thing. What are you thinking about? Do you want to mention what you're doing next, or is that a big secret?
Yeah, no, I'm pretty open about it. There's like 6 to 8 months after you turn in a manuscript before the book comes out. So I've been working on another one. And in fact, coming back to the Stolen Queen, it's like visiting old friends. I love it, where you're like, oh yeah, I remember that. But yeah, the next one I've been working on, I have a first draft almost done. And it is set at a house and a museum that no one has heard of, including most New Yorkers. It's the oldest house in New York City, in Manhattan. It's known as the Morris Jumel Mansion.
Hmm.
And no one has heard of it. It looks like it belongs in the South. It's got 4 huge white columns. It's this enormous mansion set on these beautiful gardens. It's up on 160th Street or in the 160s. So that's why I think a lot of people haven't ventured up that far.
Going up towards the cloisters. Right.
Yeah, it's on the east side, and it's on one of the highest points in Manhattan. So back in the day, if you were at the house, you could see Staten Island, New Jersey, Westchester, Long Island. It's incredible. And so George Washington used it as a headquarters for a few months during the Revolutionary War. And then in the 1800s, a woman owned it. Her name was Eliza Jumel. She was born the daughter of a prostitute in Rhode Island. She came to New York, became the richest woman in New York through her real estate dealings. She was super savvy. And she was crazy. She led this wonderful, crazy, insane life. And then her second husband was Aaron Burr, who we know from Hamilton. And in fact, they didn't last long because he was trying to get her money. So she divorced him after a couple of years. And to get him back, she hired Alexander Hamilton Jr. as her lawyer.
Wow.
So there's some really fun things to play with in it. And it's a museum that no one's heard of. It is a museum. You can go visit it. It could use some love and some attention. And I thought, the Met doesn't need me to write about it. They're fine. But the Morris Jumel Mansion could use a little spotlight on it because it's a beautiful, important part of New York history. So that's where I thought, let's go there.
What a good time you're having. I mean, thinking about places in the city that need love and attention or are fascinating. And, it's true that in some ways the Met doesn't need, but I think that all museums need a lot of love and care, even ones that are such a powerhouse as the Met, because
Yeah.
it's incredibly expensive to run. And COVID has hit so many institutions so hard. And, if federal money is all going to dry up and it's going to depend on, admission and donations and so forth to keep them going. I mean, I'm very fond of the Frick, and I think I've been to the Frick in Philadelphia, and
Okay.
it's so incredibly different. No, in Pittsburgh, sorry. It's so incredibly different than the Frick on, Fifth Avenue. I think that's a fascinating contrast between this Victorian red brick, thing and then the gorgeous Frick. But I'm sad that I didn't get to the brutalist Frick where they took most of the stuff, but they've opened up rooms now that were not available.
On the
And
second
who
floor.
knows, maybe they'll find something, so
Yeah, it opens, by the way, they just announced the opening date. It's April 17th.
oh, wow.
Yeah.
And have they done the garden over the way they did the Morgan Library?
I don't know. I know it's a huge change what they did. But they kept it very tasteful. I got a hard hat tour kind of near the end of the
Oh, yeah.
construction. It's really interesting what they've done, and opening up that second floor where they slept and making them into galleries is really fun because you really feel like you're in their house then. You're in the
Yeah,
house.
no, I can certainly see. Plus, I think they had a lot of art they didn't have space for. I mean, there's only so much wall space, so I think that's very exciting. I always see the Fragonard in the stairwell, that's
Yes.
one of my favorite, and of course,
Years.
the study. Yeah, I know. Well, I'm glad to hear that. Next time I'm going to go to New York for Thriller Fest, and I will make a point of visiting the Frick. So, Patrick, we probably rambled on here long enough. You want to pop in and see if anybody has any questions for Fiona?
Sure. Let's see. Yeah, we've got a number of questions here. Okay. Our friend Stefania from Italy is tuning in, and
Sarah.
she has a couple of good questions. One of them is Ms. Davis, what fascinates you the most about Egypt? Is there anything you've discovered about ancient Egypt that you would apply to our modern society?
Oh, that's such a good question. Yeah. What fascinated me about Egypt was just how old everything was. When I saw the mummy of Hatshepsut lying in state at this museum and walking around her and thinking, well, that's the actual woman who walked the earth 3,500 years ago and ruled Egypt. I became kind of emotional about it, as kind of present and past just collide. And what I would take back, what I found interesting about Egypt was that women were treated very equally there. If you divorced, you could keep your kids, you could have property. Women had rights. They could have a child out of wedlock, no problem. That you could have sex out of wedlock. There was no judgment. It was just a very fair society when it came to the sexes. And when I'm researching the 1970s for Charlotte, and I'm learning that in the 1970s, a woman could not get a loan or a mortgage or a credit card without a man co-signing. And so, you kind of compare those two civilizations and think, okay, who's the advanced one and who's the ancient one?
And they placed cats in their proper important position, right? They really venerated cats.
We did, yes.
Very true. More than
Um,
dogs. You're right, Patrick.
yeah, well, I've seen some of the like in the tombs that are being excavated, and I've seen some of the little mini sarcophagi of cats that are beautifully painted and really, really cool.
There's one entire temple, Patrick, you'll be interested in knowing. I think it's at Edfu, where all the mummies are crocodiles.
Is that right? Wow.
Yeah, large and small.
We just found
Yes.
that, didn't they? The recent one?
Fairly recently. I've been to it twice, and I'm trying to remember if the crocodiles were there in 2010. They were definitely there in 2019, a large number of them. And it was a place in the Nile where crocodiles apparently, you know,
Yeah, they're
come out and went back and forth. There's also one of those weird drains or whatever it is, they're kind of, I'm trying to remember what they're called. It's like a well or something that they use partly for flood control at that temple. So it's not a especially glorious temple, but it had some practical uses.
Um, let's see. Anissa, you've already answered this basically, but she says, why did you pick Egypt as your first location in a book outside of New York?
Yeah. Hi, Anissa. Yeah, it just fit with the Met. When I thought I was going to do the Egyptian wing, I thought I have to go there if I'm going to write about anything of ancient Egypt. And so that became kind of a challenge. Can I do it? It's a far away place. I've never been kind of that far. And it was just all part of the fun of it. So yeah, yeah. It's like, should I pick New Jersey or Egypt?
Right.
Not that there's anything wrong with New Jersey. I went to high school there. So
No,
You
but that's a book you couldn't have written during COVID. So I mean, you were bound to home
you're right.
when travel wasn't available. So, you now are freer to range around again.
Yes.
Let's see. Stefania again asks, have you ever been to Turin here in Italy? You can find there one of the most important Egyptian museums. If you're looking for a mystical, magical, and a little obscure atmosphere, that's your city.
Yeah, I've read about that museum. It's one of the top Egyptian museums. I think there's one there and one in Vienna that are really, top notch in terms of what they contain. So no, I've never been there, but I would go in a minute. Yeah.
All right, so here's a great question I think we all might be able to answer. What kind of curses scare you the most? And, dark question, if you could cast a curse over somebody, would you do it? And if yes, um, she says what, but I think she means who.
Oh
That
my goodness,
you may not want to answer that last
I
bit.
love it. I've never been asked that question, but I think that's a book right there. I think,
Yeah.
someone with the power to create a curse and make it happen. Yeah, I don't think I could do that. I am a Scorpio, so I do like to get revenge, but I don't think I could put a curse on someone. But I love that idea of this, if everybody got one curse, what would they do with it? I think it's a brilliant question.
Hmm.
Sort of a variation on if you had the lamp and you rubbed it, what would your wish be if you only got one wish?
But if it's a curse, it has to be a bad wish, which is
Mhm.
what's so fun about it.
Yep.
Yeah. Oh, all right. Thanks. Idea for the next book. I appreciate it.
I love some of those Haitian voodoo curses, little dolls and things like that. Um, we'll be diplomatically quiet about our respective curses, right, Barbara?
Yes.
All right, good.
We're all thinking, I'm sure. Yeah.
We're all thinking. We're all
Everyone
thinking.
has one. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, let's see. Over to YouTube. You have a lot of comments, just, big fans of your work who are saying how much they love your stuff and how interesting this book sounds. Um, let's see. On YouTube, it says Jennifer says, I always love it when a historical fiction, not a book, inspires me to do some of my own research into the characters and places. I'm intrigued by Egypt. It'd be a great place to visit someday, maybe the Winter Palace.
There you go. Yeah, it's really a wonderful place to visit. And right now, when I went, it was pretty crowded. Right now, apparently it's not as crowded. Now is a good time to go. And I've just talked to so many Egyptologists and archaeologists who go every year from, November to February or March when it's cool. And it's an incredible country because there's so much buried under the sand. And so
Yeah.
there's more to be found out. There's so much that still has to be uncovered. And that's a very exciting idea.
It's a dry climate, and that helps preserve things. Do you know which are the three major tombs never found that are like the golden thing for tomb robbers or tomb finders?
Tell me, who are they?
Cleopatra,
Yeah, I figured.
Alexander,
Mhm.
and I'm trying to remember the other one. Our theory, Dana's theory, my friend Dana, who's also, is that Cleopatra's tomb and one other are probably at the bottom of the Mediterranean because so much of Alexandria has, fallen in there. I'll try to remember the third one, but I do think, it's fascinating that people are looking all over for Cleopatra and Alexander, who may not be buried there. She would be, but it's not clear that he would. But it's also possible that her body wasn't as preserved as other rulers, because of the circumstances in which she died.
It was really near the end of ancient Egypt. It was about to, she was pretty recent in terms of people ruling Egypt. What I found fascinating was all the tombs that have been raided, but were raided thousands of years ago. It's not like someone in the 1800s came and stole things. Some were raided as soon as they were locked up. One of the workers would tell someone and they'd go and steal everything that was in it.
There were always huge inequities in wealth. And so, yeah, I'm sure that it was irresistible for the really poor people to think about all that stuff buried there.
Golden chariots, yeah. Mummified geese, yeah.
But you're right. I think there's a lot still to be discovered. I mentioned the thought that maybe Tut's tomb is just a front for something much larger. And of course, the problem they have is if they cut through Tut's tomb and the paintings and so forth on the wall, how are they going to do that without destroying it? Which really presupposes they'd have to go somewhere all the way around it and find a way in if they can. But
Right.
LiDAR is a tool that, has enormous potential for seeing through the ground and discovering stuff that it wasn't a tool that archaeologists had until recently.
And who knows what they'll invent in the next 20 years that we'll be able to see everything that's cut under those tombs. And you're right, so many are hidden away. We don't know where they are, but there's definitely more to be found. And who knows what's inside them.
Yeah, no, absolutely true. I was sad to note that Queen Nefertari's tomb in the Valley of the Queens has been closed. And I think part of it is just the paintings and everything suffer from the exhalation of the visitors. They're really so fragile. We have a cavern here called Karshner Caverns, and the state of Arizona only lets a few people go through it at any time because they're trying not to damage, the
It's a
cavern.
living cave.
Right, it's a living cave, and they don't want to screw up the ecology. So
Yeah.
let's just say Carlsbad Cavern, which is not a living cave, so it can handle lots of tourists. So I think that's going to be a problem Egypt also has to think about in terms of people visiting tombs.
Absolutely, because it's where they get their money. So there's an impetus to get as many people in as you can, but they do rotate where you can go in
They do.
the valley.
Actually, they're limited to, I'm trying to remember, there's a limit of like 3 or 5 for most tour groups, and they rotate them around.
Yeah, so that's good.
And then since Tut's tomb is in pretty poor condition anyway, you can pay extra baksheesh, and you can usually add it on. Although in general, I think it's a disappointment.
Yeah, it wasn't bad, but Seti 2, that tomb was that was the most amazing one, I thought.
Yeah.
Really.
I like Queen Nefertari's is the one that really blew me away. Wow.
Ah,
Anyway, yeah, we could go on and on. Sorry, Patrick, anything else?
Um, no, not really. I got a little clarification though, getting back to curses, our favorite subject. She really meant what kind of curse, if you could cast a curse, what kind of curse would you cast? That's a tongue twister.
Yeah, yeah. And I don't, the options are so vast, really, aren't they? You
They have
know?
they all have their charms, right?
Yep, I love it.
And the curse
Well,
that's
that'll
in the
be
book, the curse that's associated with Hathorkare in the book is that if anyone takes something that she, um, um, one of her possessions or something that she loves out of the country of Egypt, they'll be, tortured by the gods. And so that's the curse in the book that kind of haunts everyone who comes in touch with anything that she has had her hands on.
Oh, that's a wonderful way to end up. I like that idea. All right. Well, Fiona, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much. The Stolen Queen, I think we only have like 5 or 6 copies left. It is our historical fiction subscription book this month, but I'm hoping to work out a way for Fiona to sign more books for us later in February. So if you want one and we are gone, or we are out rather, feel free to put in an order, and if we can work it out, we won't charge you until we can. And I mean, of course, it reads exactly the same, whether she signed it or not, but that's not really the
Lots
point,
the
is
same,
it?
yeah.
I know, right. Anyway, thank you so much, Fiona, and good night, everybody. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Barbara. Thank you, Patrick.